So in this how-to video today, I'm going to show you how to coat your board. Once you've built your wooden board and you need to put some kind of sealer on it, we use a marine grade sealer. It's because it has a UV inhibitor in it, and it will prevent the board, the timber from going funny colour. So it keeps the timber nice and fresh. It's very easy to touch up in the future. It's a very forgiving product. So today I'm going to show you how we go about coating our boards. So what I like to do is obviously get all the scratches out, finish all your sanding of the board if the rails are right and you're happy with the finished product. As I said, you got the scratches out because they will highlight once you put your coating on. So the first coat we'll put on will be a diluted coat, and so the coat will be diluted down to about 15% terps. When you're preparing your board for sanding, we'll sand with 80 grit to get the shape right. Then we'll go down, we're happy with that, we'll go down to 120 grit. And then when we're happy with the finish, we'll go to 240. And then if there's any scratches in the timber, then the dust created from the 240 grit paper will fill in those scratches, or fill in those scratches that if they're still there, and you'll see them very easily. So then you go back to the 120, take those scratches out that you can now see that have been highlighted by the dust. Take them out, go back to the 240, and then continue on sanding. And once you're happy with your finish, dust it down. Then prepare your sealer, and I've got some here I prepared earlier. So this sealer here has actually got a tint in it. This board is for Grant, who's wanted this board for him, so I've knocked up this board. This is a teak, so it's the normal sealer we use, but you can buy it with a colour in it. And this particular colour is teak, so it looks a bit dark. If you're going to coat your board with just a clear, it won't look as dark as this. I'll give this 2 coats of this teak sealer, and then I'll give it 2 coats of clear over top, and that'll really make the colour stand out. So don't load your brush up too much. Work from the centre, right, down the board. So when you're working from the centre, then work from the centre down out to the rails. We don't want to load the rails up too much with too much sealer, because you'll get dribbles and runs on the board. Very easy, just like painting with water. So this is a very forgiving product. If you get a ding in your board, you can easily repair it, and just have to repair that actual section. You don't need to strip it all off. As you can see, this is coming up quite dark. So once I've actually loaded the brush, not too much, then I work it towards the rail. So by the time I get to the rails, I've got less on my brush. So technically it's going to be less on the rails. What that does is it prevents you getting too many runs, too many dribble marks from the sealer when it's drying. So you might think, well, I haven't got enough on the rails, but when we turn the board over and we do the same on the other side, you actually do the rails twice. So the rails are going to get 2 coats, and they'll make up for not having enough on it the first time round. Alright, it's quite easy to work with. You don't need to go too fast, but you don't want to take your time with it either. So I said, it's quite a nice product to work with. This board has got cork rails. A lot of our boards are coming through now have got cork rails, and the cork does soak up the first coat of sealer just like the timber does. So you may get some runs underneath, but it's very easy just to run your brush along the bottom and pick up any runs. I like to put, in all the coats I do on boards, I like to put terps in each coat. I just find it's easier to go back and make some adjustments. So if you use it neat from the tin and it starts to tack off, you can't actually go back and touch it up. If there's a bit there I miss and I go back and touch it up, it'll actually create a drag mark, and that looks a bit unsightly. You're better off, if you're doing that, you're better off just leaving it and sand it out in the next coat. So I like to thin it out, and I find by thinning it out, it works. It takes a little bit longer to dry initially, but it gives you the option of being able to go right over the board when you've completely finished, and swing the brush from one end right to the other and fix up any dribbles or runs, or you might have missed a bit you might want to touch up. So that's by putting just a splash of terps in the product, in the sealer, on each coat. So I put about, so I said the first coat, which is this one, is about 15 to 20% terps. So it's quite runny, but the idea of that is that the terps will dilute the marine spar, and it will help it soak into the timber. Then it gets right into the timber, the terps will then evaporate and the product has got into the timber. Subsequent coats you don't need as much, don't need as much terps in the mix. Doesn't matter if you do, but you don't need as much. So you can either use, this comes in a gloss or a matte, and you can use either. It actually comes in a satin, and I've found that the satin is very forgiving. So if you've got a few marks in your board that you've kind of missed when you were preparing it, it doesn't really matter, because the product is quite a forgiving coat, so it doesn't show up. If it's a real full gloss coat, it'll show up all the imperfections on the board. So now I've coated the board completely. So now I'm going to just go back going to get down in the light here and have a look from one end to the other, making sure it's all wetted out. So now I can go back and touch it up if I find any bits I haven't quite got, especially around the bottom of the rails. It's looking pretty good. As you can see, that's come up nice. So as I said, this one's got a bit of teak in it, so it's made it a little bit darker, and it's come up, that's what the guy wanted. Grant wanted a bit of a little bit darker. So that's the first coat. So I'll let this dry off. Depending on the weather, this could take up on a nice sunny day, you know, around the sort of late high 20s, early 30 degree temperature. Could probably take about 4 or 5 hours to dry. Obviously, if it's a bit cooler, it'll take most of the day. I'll let this dry off. I'll flip it over. I'll do the same on the bottom. Then when both sides are done, I'll sand between the coats with 240 grit paper, and that's just to take any roughness off of the timber, because when the paint, when the sealer is gone into the timber grains and the fibres will rise. So by sanding it off, it makes it all nice and smooth. I'll do the same again, top and bottom, another coat, and then on this one, as I said, I'll put 2 sealer coats over top, and it's pretty much the same process, whether it's a tint or a clear marine spar. It acts exactly the same way. This just gives you a different look. So that's how we seal a board. Shortly after I've done 2 coats of this sealer, I'm putting a logo on, and I'll run through that later about how to put a logo on.